This is H. Grant Troop, Mid-Atlantic Ag Reports Network correspondent, reporting today from York County, Pennsylvania, just east of York, the town of York. And we're looking here across the field at a field day. This is a field of double crop soybeans. They've got some pretty good height on them for the time that they were planted, following small grain. And so I'd say they're legged up pretty nice. They're starting to get some pods. I would say they probably have about 3 weeks yet to make grain. After we get to about that third week of September in this geography, you're pretty well done starting any more beans and just trying to get finished out what you have. Some of the other things happening in this field day, we have Penn State's variety trials for field corn. Out in this field, as you can see here that we're looking at now, the plot's out in the middle of that field, and we have attendees currently out in the field observing the different hybrids, looking at the disease characteristics from one hybrid to the next, from one company to the next, and doing some evaluations that way. And this will be taken to yield later on in the fall for grain. I have some other things happening here today too. We're looking at the nitrogen studies. Dr. Beagle from Penn State, our soil scientist and nutrient management professor, has been here, and we have that clip that you'll see in today's report of him giving a talk about the various nitrogen stabilizers that are on the market to be used today. And we had a plot study for those products to see how they're performing. And that's been an integral part of today's field day, along with looking at the triple stack BTs and how they're working in our corn environments in this section of Pennsylvania, southeast corner of Pennsylvania. And we compared the triple stack from the Monsanto lineup and the triple stack from the Dow AgroSciences lineup, basically to see how they're differing, if they are differing in their ability to withstand insect pressure.
Especially with the high price of nitrogen the last few years, is looking at some additives to nitrogen to try to improve the efficiency a little bit of the nitrogen fertilizer we use. Sort of main ways we lose nitrogen, we put it out there. Probably the biggest one that we worry the most about is volatilization. And anytime we use urea, this is just straight urea fertilizer. We can use UAN, liquid nitrogens, half urea. Most of the nitrogen is available in manure as urea, so in Pennsylvania, urea is pretty darn important to us. And urea is unique in that when we put it out on the soil, there's an enzyme called urease that breaks the urea down, and one of the first products that forms when urea breaks down is ammonia. And ammonia is a gas. Okay? If we have that urea down in the soil, that gas forms, but it's quickly absorbed in the moisture in the soil, absorbed to the cation exchange capacity in the soil, no problem. The problem comes when we put urea on the surface, because then when that ammonia forms, there's nothing but air around it, so it just goes off into the air and we lose it. And we can lose up to a third of our nitrogen in a week with urea on the surface. So that's a big problem. If you're going to lose a third of your nitrogen, that's pretty expensive. There's a lot more concern with what happens to that ammonia once it gets into the air environmentally. It doesn't tend to stay in the air. It comes back down other places. One of the biggest single sources of nitrogen in the Chesapeake Bay is actually nitrogen that comes out of the air. And a lot of that is from nitrogen that goes up somewhere else. So it's a problem agronomically, it's a problem economically, and it's a problem environmentally. So what can we do about it? One thing we can do is just don't use urea. And an example there is ammonium sulfate. Ammonium sulfate doesn't volatilize. Okay, so we can put it on the surface, it can lay there forever in our soils, and we won't lose it. Now some places you may read about you can get volatilization, that's only in very high pH soils. You've got to be up around 8 or 9. We just don't have those soils. So for us, this is one option we have. The downside to ammonium sulfate, two main ones, it generally is quite a bit more expensive. And if you look at the analysis, ammonium sulfate is 21% nitrogen, urea is 46. So when you're spreading fertilizer, you got to spread handle more than twice as much ammonium sulfate that you do urea to get the same amount of nitrogen. So it's an option. And one of the treatments we have in here, people that sell ammonium sulfate have been pushing, is mixture of urea and ammonium sulfate, basically just diluting it. So not all of your nitrogen out there is volatilizing, and it's not quite as expensive. You're only using half as much of the urea in there. The other things we can do, the most common thing we've done historically was just incorporate the urea. If we can till it in right away, we can stop that volatilization. Now, right away is the key thing in this, because this happens very fast. I mentioned before we can lose a third in a week. Most of that loss is in the first day or so. So even guys that are in a tillage system incorporating their urea, if they're not getting it done within a day or so, probably wasting their time if that's the only reason they're tilling. They're probably not getting the benefit of that. And very few people really can coordinate that to get it incorporated right away. So even in tillage systems, this can be a problem. Another timing thing we can do is just get it on ahead of a rain. Half-inch of good soaking rain does a good job of incorporation. Again, it has to be right away. If it rains a week later, it doesn't do us much good. It's got to rain within that first day or so. So if we can time that, spread urea right before rain, that's another way we can get around it. What we're looking at here, though, are some additives, and we have two here that we're looking at. This one's called Super U, and it's urea, 4600, but it has an additive called agrotane. Agrotane's a urease inhibitor. Urease is that enzyme that breaks the urea down. So if you inhibit that, the urea stays in the urea molecule. It doesn't break down into ammonia. If it doesn't break down into ammonia, it doesn't volatilize. Now, it's just an inhibitor. It doesn't stop it completely, and we don't want to stop it completely because we want the urea to break down into ammonium and eventually the nitrate. That's the forms plants take the nitrogen up. But it can inhibit that for a week or two, depending on the rate. Higher rates, you can inhibit a little longer. That kind of becomes an economic decision. But putting the urease inhibitor on, the urea basically just stays there as urea until you get your tillage done or you get that half-inch of rain, and you don't have much loss. Agrotane's been around for a long time. A lot of research on it. It's been pretty well demonstrated to be a good product. It's been around, but we haven't used it much, mainly because it's not a cheap product. Not terribly expensive, but to be perfectly honest with you, for many farmers, the main approach they took to dealing with this is, well, we'll just put an extra 30, 40, 50 pounds on, and that was cheaper than spending the money on a urease inhibitor, just to compensate for the loss. Economically, that made sense. Environmentally, that's not such a good idea because we're putting it on with the intention we're going to lose it. So that's one product there. It works pretty well. We have a look at that in the plot here. A new one is called Nutrisphere. It's also urea that has a chemical additive, a proprietary chemical that's also supposed to stop volatilization. It's a urease inhibitor. Not very much research has been done on Nutrisphere, so we don't have that history to really know how well it works. And to be perfectly honest with you, the research that has been done has been kind of mixed with Nutrisphere. So I guess I'm not ready to pass judgment on it yet, but I'm not as encouraged as I am with what we've seen with the Agrotane product. So that's a way we can help deal with the volatilization. We'll look at those plots in here in a minute. I'll talk about them all first.